And it's football to your face. We've got quite a bit to discuss. Some interesting events yesterday evening in the Premier League. Also, the other leagues are now up and running, and maybe not as interesting as you'd like, but still a lot to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we did chat about Jose Mourinho last week, and the topic of conversation was after a loss to Brighton, whether or not, and you know, a deserved loss, not like a surprise last minute kind of deal. The topic was whether or not his famous third season syndrome was going to continue, albeit this time without a league title, which generally speaking it happens after he's won one or two league titles, he falls out of favour.
That's right. We did win a Europa League.
Yeah, and a League Cup. You know, that's for most clubs that would be something they'd really remember, but for Manchester United, that's not the case. And 1 week later, they take on a real threat in Tottenham. Sorry about that, but they take on a real threat in Tottenham, and they've beaten comprehensively, at least on the scoreboard. If you and the press conference afterwards, this kind of deal. So that's it. We did speak about it previously, but I think it warrants further discussion.
For sure. Jose Mourinho, the gift that keeps on giving, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's...
But I'm the special one. I have 3 Premier League titles, more than all the other Premier League managers combined.
Absolutely.
He was just waiting for Arsene Wenger to leave so he could pull that stat out.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it wouldn't have worked that well, that well last year, perhaps. But, well, I mean, again, that whole thing about respect, please, I deserve respect. You need to respect me. And while on the other, there's Arsene Wenger was getting quite a bit of, from his own fans and from the media, quite a bit of criticism. So he probably could have had the same argument. But fortunately, he's a little bit more reserved.
Yeah, I mean, hey, look, I'm not the biggest Tottenham fan, as you know, but
Really?
I'm going to try and be even-handed for this. It never makes me particularly happy when Tottenham win, but in this case, there's a silver lining because I think Mourinho's a cunt. And I am not afraid to say that in public.
All right. That's going to get us some likes and some...
Talk about shit stirring. But I don't think that's particularly a particularly controversial point.
No, and I mean there are coaches who will endear themselves to players, and players will want to perform more for that coach because of the friendship and the companionship that they have, and that exists in every sport. And then there's coaches who will push someone further through criticism and through being an absolute shit, you know, that was the thing always with Jose Mourinho, and it was that that behavior was excused because of its success.
Right.
And if you're going to treat people like that, and you know, it comes into everything else as well. If you have, someone like that who's not really controllable, who will do that in front of sponsors, who will probably put a bit of a fear into incoming players and young players. He's never been good with young players. You know, that is all okay if you're winning in football, you know, whether that's good or bad or not. But when you're not winning, that attitude not only doesn't look very good for you, but it pushes you into the area of being this kind of tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist guy who people go to for a wacky quote.
And you can tell it's having a lot of effect on him personally. You know, the pressure that he is feeling and perceiving is just immense. I think this entire respect thing is pretty crazy. I mean, I didn't. You can't hear the reporters that well when they're asking questions, but from what it sounded like, there weren't that many. There certainly wasn't anything that warranted or that constituted disrespect. And for him to just get up and walk out. Usually, like, you know, getting up and walking out is I don't know, it's drastic enough in its own. But to walk out saying, you know, respect, 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 as if you've been greatly disrespected just because some reporters had the temerity to ask you a few questions.
Sure.
I think that the house is falling in on itself a bit.
Yeah, it certainly seems to be. And this this idea that the other thing that kind of came out of that press conference was that he said, well, you're never happy. I win and I win ugly, and you say that it's not an attractive game. And now we play an attractive game and we lose. Why can't you be satisfied? Which is really like, that's not, when you're criticizing a bunch of 1-0 wins taking you to a title, you're not saying that it would be better if we lost every game 3-0, but with a bunch of attacking flair. I mean, they're two different things. And I think that's what he came out, and he walked around afterwards and was waving to all the fans like he'd achieved something, and talked about how the fans were singing afterwards and were so happy, and it just really didn't seem like that happened in the broadcast that I saw. But this kind of stuff, it just seems like he's going further and further down this rabbit hole of paranoid ranting, and that never ends well for a coach. Never ends well for anyone, really.
But he's kind of made a career of it, and he's kind of the cat with 9 lives. Ever since he left Milan, I'd say, his track record has been declining. So with Madrid, you're expected to win the league. It's and he only won it once out of 3 years. And you're expected to win the Champions League. Look at how much success they've had in the past 5 years since he left. And so I would say that I would definitely rate his performance at Real Madrid as a strong underperform. I would say that he had a bit of a comeback with Chelsea. But the way that he alienated those players, I think that was something very new, and it signified a new chapter perhaps for him. I mean, for example, like when you see Zlatan's interviews about Mourinho and his time at Inter Milan, he said that Mourinho turned him into an invincible warrior, just like in terms of his how much confidence he gave him, and how much he wanted to go out there and give everything for his manager. And Mourinho is an incredibly charismatic guy, and I think he's smart in creating this siege mentality that everybody is doubting you, but I know your true qualities. Everybody is doubting us, but I believe in this team, and if we work together, we can get there. I mean, he's an incredibly charismatic individual, but to have the players turn on him the way that they did at Chelsea, and that entire mindset completely fall apart and backfire, I think that marked those were the first few chinks in his armor. And now, over the past 2 seasons at Manchester United, where he hasn't delivered, that pressure, I think, it's too much. I don't think that his way of dealing with players is necessarily fits these circumstances anymore.
I think that's definitely true. I mean, he's never had more than 4 years at a club, and that was the one time at Chelsea. And I don't think he's a guy that ever endears himself to players. So it's not. So there is a track record of that, but I do think that the creation of a siege mentality works when it's us against them, and that's how a lot of clubs get by. A lot of clubs in all different sports across the world will build this idea that what's the phrase, like, you hate us and we don't care, and that works if you're sticking together and it's you against the world and all this kind of stuff. But he hasn't been doing that. He has been saving some of the most savage kind of bile for his own players, and whether it's very passive aggressive stuff like criticizing Anthony Martial when he went to visit his new baby in the off season, in a very I don't know where he is. Maybe he's visiting his baby. I don't know where he is, which is it's like if you don't come to Christmas and your mother will, I thought you were going to be here, but you're not here. I look at your seat and it's empty. This kind of stuff. My mom doesn't do that, but it's just this kind of attitude, this passive aggressive stuff, or he can be very pointed and just very much like this. Luke Shaw is too fat to play. This kind of stuff that. and I think that he's never been a guy that can come in and inspire people with his spirit and this kind of thing. But I do think that he has that ability to build individuals up and to make them into, I guess, us against the world kind of guys. But he hasn't been doing that lately. Another thing that to mention on that Real Madrid point is last year, Manchester United, they finished, they win the FA Cup final. They finished second. It was a historic season from Man City. And that same Guardiola was coaching an historically good Barcelona at that time in Spain when he was with Real Madrid. So I do think that perhaps there's a realization there now that he's one of the best coaches of his generation, but he's not Guardiola. Again, he's been thwarted in his this time his second season by the same man.
Right. I mean, I think that's a really interesting perspective. But I think that this is the first time Manchester United is the first club where he has so openly and personally criticized his players, because I think it's partially because he has veered away from this collective us versus them. Because you know what, every manager in every league will criticize the referee, and that's a very convenient way to say, okay, well, it's not my players, it's not our fault. Even though inside the dressing room you might have a very different tone, and maybe when you're speaking frankly and away from the cameras, you can be a bit more expressive and a bit more honest. But there's a reason that the managers do that. I mean, Wenger is famous for saying, "I didn't see it," and there's a reason. You want to protect the players. And when you're going to criticize them, even give them the blow dryer treatment, the way that Sir Alex Ferguson used to, and that's something that stays in the dressing room. I've been lucky to play various sports with various coaches with very different coaching styles, but there are definitely some coaches that really tear into you. I played American football when I was 13, 14 years old, and I had this one great coach who would just lose it on the field, just absolutely lose it. But then like he would come up to you after training, he'd put his arm around you and be like, "Hey, like I want to make sure you understand, because I see something great in you, and you can and you'll be amazing." And so, like, when I would do something good or I would fix that mistake, he would stop practice and he would tell everybody, "Look at what Junayd did. Whatever he had for lunch, I'm having that too." And so, like, there's definitely a technique. You have to criticize, but I think doing it in front of the press corps, doing it so publicly, doing it, when you to the extent that you're bringing families. When you're commenting about them, not only personally but publicly, I think Mourinho is not in a good place. I don't think he would do that at Milan. I don't think he would do that at Chelsea, where he was confident about his team's prospects for being successful.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing to say about that, and it's not directly sports related, but one of my favorite comedians, Norm Macdonald, said the thing with comics is that they live long enough to become a caricature of themselves. And so whatever has been their, I guess, their most successful or their kind of calling card in a way, whether it's doing wacky impressions or whether it's being obnoxious or whether it's being, the kind and sensitive person who says outrageous stuff, and whatever your personality type is, then they rely on that, and that becomes who they are. They become this caricature of themselves, when in reality that was part of what brought them to where they were. And perhaps
before it was intentional. It was like, I'm going to do this very intentionally because it'll yield results. But then you start buying into that.
Yeah, and perhaps he's tricked himself into thinking that this kind of me against the world mentality is how I became who I am, and he obviously thinks he's pretty special, which we've known for a long time, but at no point does he try even false modesty. And he deserves to be considered that way. But it just doesn't seem like, it seems like he's hasn't really got a period of self-reflection, hasn't really decided, you know what, maybe it wasn't a good idea to do some of this stuff. I mean, as well, he's up against the most competitive Premier League in a long time. No longer can the name and the money of Manchester United bring them the best players. And
especially if you look at how some of those amazing players, like if you look at Paul Pogba at Juventus, how their careers have so dramatically tailed off. We spoke about this last week, so we won't talk too much about it. But for example, Paul Pogba, he was thought of as a contender within the next 5 years as for best player of the world, for a Ballon d'Or. And he's a far cry from that now, despite his showing at the World Cup.
That's absolutely the case. And he showed at the World Cup how good he can be. Not that it's not a Mario Götze situation where he was really considered to be the next best thing in German football, and then he played under Guardiola, and since then has never been the same player. Who knows whether that was going to happen, or who knows whether it wouldn't. Sometimes that can happen with someone's confidence and that kind of thing. But it just seems like Paul Pogba's not being given the space and the treatment that he should be given at Manchester United. And when you bring in someone for 100 million, and which at that time was a record, you would think that you allow them to have a greater degree of control. It's the same now that Juventus is being kind of re-engineered to fit Ronaldo, which happened at Madrid over several years. Because if you're going to spend that much money, you don't just keep
you
it as
don't
an
force
afterthought.
them to fit into your very strict interpretation of the game. Like if you look at Sanchez, this guy had something like 37 goals in his last season at Arsenal, and since he moved, I think he has 3 goals. Mourinho. The thing is, like, and this will play into our next topic, but Mourinho doesn't buy young players and give them freedom to express themselves. He buys established
young
players.
He doesn't give young guys a chance.
Right.
I mean, he doesn't. I mean, the purchase of Sanchez was a spite purchase. It was, I don't want him to go to Man City. That was the reason that he was bought. It was like a ego measuring purchase. I mean, and the Paul Pogba thing. He's buying players like when I play fantasy football, because I'm like, why not? I've got the money. I'll get a Pogba and give me a Lukaku.
Yeah.
This is this kind of thing of like, whereas Guardiola spent more money and Klopp spent almost as much money, but there seems to be more method to it. Whereas the process of regeneration, or whatever you want to call it, at Manchester United doesn't seem to have much method to it.
Exactly. Now let's talk a little bit about the game, because for me, the game and the reaction to it are two very different topics. Just shortly, for me, I think that managers get too much shtick for what happens in those 90 minutes, because football is a crazy game. It's a question of luck. It's a question of nerves. It's a question of putting away your chances. And for me, Manchester United were the better side for the first half of the game, and they had they could have been 2, maybe even 3-0 up. That penalty appeal, which I think was a stonewall penalty that wasn't given. Maybe if everything had gone as it should. With Lukaku putting the ball into the back of that open goal, and that penalty been given, Man United probably go in 2-1 at the break. But football is a funny game, and Spurs took their chances. I think Moura scored with every goal, every shot he put on frame. Harry Kane. Listen, I mean, I'm not a Tottenham fan, but this guy plays so simply and so effectively, and he's so intelligent. You'll never see Harry Kane doing a whole bunch of step overs and like trying to beat a man one-on-one, or trying to dribble through like 4 or 5 players. He just is really intelligent with his positioning. When he is about to challenge for a header, he knows where to place it, and he's got the skill to get it on target. And it's a very well drilled team. And unfortunately, yesterday was the day when Mourinho decided that he was going to play a bit more open. And I think that really upset the balance of his team, and they weren't prepared to play that way. Maybe he bowed to player pressure, that we're saying, okay, we're tired of playing this way. Give us a little bit of freedom to express ourselves. And maybe Mourinho, since he was in such a embattled position to begin with, folded, and this is what came out of it.
Yeah, I get the feeling if he did that, he would have got stuck into the players at the press conference. He would have said, "They want me to play this way, and now look what happens." I think he wouldn't have been able to bite his tongue in that sense. I think you're like completely right in the sense of it's strange to start that in week 3. I saw their win over Leicester in week 1, and that was very, from the moment that penalty went in after 5 minutes or whatever it was, you knew what the result was going to be. It seems strange to put it in at this point, but maybe he thought that's the best chance we have of beating Tottenham, that we have to be expansive and open. They're a top 6 team. Maybe that's what we need to do. But I do really, I do like the way that Klopp or Guardiola would have reacted in that sense. Like when Klopp took over, Brendan Rodgers had been winning 1-0 or 1-1 draws for the last year. And that happened for the first few months at Liverpool. And then there were games that he'd lost 3 or 4-0. And he's like, but you see what we're getting at. We're building towards something. I find this game to be, the result aside, to be inspirational for what we're getting at. And that's something that Mourinho could have said. But it's also about, being a little bit smarter about it, coming as opposed to bringing up this statistic about 3. You know what 3 is? 3-0. You know what 3? I won 3 Premier Leagues. Yeah, but you know what it is? It's round 3, and you've got 3 points. It's just right. If you want to play that game. So it seems like, again, maybe there's method in the madness, and you never know. This guy is one of the best coaches of all time.
But I think there's a reason why his longevity is so limited at every club he's been at. And I think that it's pretty authentic that he is losing control of the situation, and that they're in a downward spiral. And so for me, I'm pretty confident he won't make it through the season.
Yeah, I would say so. I think a big thing was the lack of buying all of the players that he wanted. This kind of shopping list of players guys like Boateng, who just seemed like, I don't know that he's a really good fit. I don't know that he's still in form. He gets injured all the time. The fact that didn't happen, and the fact that other players that are quite good players but are out of favour that could be sold haven't been sold suggests to me that they're kind of planning for life after Mourinho. I think Anthony Martial is an amazing player, and he was so sought after by big clubs. Juventus and Bayern were really interested in Martial. And the fact that he didn't go anywhere, even though he didn't really play much last year, I think suggests that they're planning for life after Mourinho. They don't want to get rid of all of their potential talents who are 22, 23 years old to play Mourinho ball if he leaves in 6 months' time.